that you represent. We're going to be keeping track of this just for our records and making materials and information available to you post-webinar. So it'd be really helpful if you just chime in with your name and let us know what organization you're representing. Seeing lots of Antigonish businesses. That's fantastic.
I see under the name Kaylee Tobin, Jeff has just sent a note saying it's Jeff. Can you see and hear me?
Okay. Ron, have you made Jeff a speaker?
He said it's under Kaylee Tobin.
That he's gonna, he just said he's gonna log out and back in again.
Jamie Smith just joined us.
I don't know if you're keeping an eye on the chat there, but Jeff is saying if we can pull him in with the Kaylee Tobin name, that's fine.
I just did.
Oh, perfect.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm not going to be the Minister of Technology anytime soon. I thought I had, I really thought I had it under control, but obviously not. So I'm just going to see what I can do for video here. And we're all set. There we go.
Great. How you doing?
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. I was listening intently to you, but you couldn't hear or see me. So maybe that's the higher powers telling us something. But anyway.
Okay.
So we're all good.
We'll just hand it over to you, Lindsay, and get things started for us.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Ross, and I'm the Employer Engagement Specialist with Nova Scotia Works Career Connections in Antigonish, and I'm also the Secretary of the Antigonish Chamber of Commerce. We are thrilled to be partnering today with the CEI on this webinar. As a rural community in Nova Scotia, we know how important small business is to our local economy, and in order to continue to thrive and prosper during these difficult times, we must understand programming and funding available to us. The future of work has changed, and we need to adapt to our new world and ensure we continue to be a competitive market and keep our economy alive. We know small businesses are the heart of our community, and we're here to support you through the Chamber and Nova Scotia Works. We want to continue to be the voice for prosperous and innovative business in the Antigonish County. Thank you, John.
Okay. Well, welcome. As I mentioned again, welcome everybody. Great group of people here. I've spoken with many of you throughout COVID-19 situation that's hit the world actually, but we certainly feel it in Antigonish to a certain degree for sure. And as I've been kind of, speaking to some business owners about the various programs provincially and federally and otherwise for trying to help you deal with COVID-19 in your business, we discovered as a chamber that it's really important to get people connected as a group to speak about all the initiatives together. And try to help you make sense of what makes the best fit for your business. Before I kind of proceed with the agenda for the day, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an opener on what not everyone's familiar with Zoom and the Zoom webinar technology. So we're just going to tell you a little bit about the functions. So what's going to happen today On the webinar, you'll find all the basic meeting functions at the bottom of your screen. You'll be able to see who's joining us. You see a chat box. You may see some an opportunity to ask questions as a separate tab. Brian, if you can just confirm if we have that now or not.
I believe, yeah. If it's not
Okay.
if it's not question and answer, you can always use the chat box to ask your questions.
Exactly. So if you have a question as we go along, maybe we could just have you enter that into the chat box. We're going to hear all of the speakers go through, and then we're going to open it up to questions later. If there is at any point through the presentations, if you need clarification on something that you're not clear about, certainly enter in the chat box. We've got people watching that, and we'll ask for clarification at that time. Specific questions about how programs work and how they apply to you, those would be things that we'll get into a little bit later in the webinar. You can unmute and unmute yourself. You can show video, which would be great. We'd love to see you. If not, there is a stop video option in the lower left hand of your screen. If you have a question as well that you'd like to speak to, as in other words, audio, you can put your hands up, and we'll give you the ability to speak. Go back one slide, please. So, okay, so I think we're good for that. If there's any questions you have about the technical side of things, and you're able to enter a text into the chat, please do that. If not, send an email to us at contact@antigonishchamber.com. We'll get a reply back to you. Next slide, please. So we've shared who's here. Really impressed to see the wide berth of people who are joining us today from all different backgrounds: government, small and medium enterprises, organizations that benefit businesses, nonprofits. So really happy about the diversity that's here, and we hope that we can, from that, build a very engaging conversation today with you. And we want you to make sure that you're getting all your questions out and you feel very comfortable about asking them. And asking for clarification on the programs. Certainly, here's your chance. Next slide, please. So I'll be managing the conversation today as well. Lindsay Ross, who's with me, will be kind of watching things within the chat box. You'll hear her chime in every now and then to bring a question forward. If I don't, so that we'll make sure that we get to every question we can today before the time's up. So you're encouraged, as I mentioned, to ask questions at the bottom of your screen. You can raise your hand, and it will be recorded. So you probably should know that we'll be recording this so that we can provide it to you on the website and in follow-up. Also, there'll be a list of programs related to COVID-19. Many of which you've seen, and you'll find those on the Antigonish Chamber of Commerce website, resource section. So you land on the main page, and you can follow the link to get more information about programs. Next slide, please. So our three speakers today, we've got representatives from the federal, provincial government as well. We're going to have some brief messages from our two municipal units, Antigonish Town and Antigonish County. And we'll also hear from Jamie Smith of St. Yves's Center for Employment Innovation. Some interesting comments and thoughts about how Antigonish has been working through the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. We're going to be allowing 20 minutes for joint federal presentations. So you're going to hear from both MP Sean Fraser and MP Mike Kelloway. There is an extensive list of programs, and the federal government has been working with businesses to try to resolve all the issues around applying the different incentives and initiatives to helping your business survive. Then we're going to hear from Jeff MacLellan, who's the Minister of Business and Trade. He's going to talk about the provincial response to COVID-19 as well. Then we're going to, as I mentioned, we're going to hear from our municipal units, and we're going to deal with questions and answers. So we're going to have a number of question and answer periods. And as we go through the presentation today, you're going to be asked some polled questions. So we want to know specifically what programs you've used. What are your thoughts around the reopening process you've started to hear a lot about? We're interested in knowing if you're ready for that. and so on, what your general thoughts are about business through COVID-19. Next slide. We want to thank the partners and sponsors for the event today. We've got an extensive amount of help from the Town of Antigonish and the Municipality of the County of Antigonish, Career Connections, and has really helped us to put the word out. St. FX Center for Employment Innovation, providing the technology and related support for today's webinar. We certainly couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to start off things with our federal presentation. So you've heard the Canada's response to COVID-19. You've heard about the Department of Finance's list of programs and how they're trying to manage the risk to business that's impacting. And our first thing we're going to start off with Mike Kelloway, who's the MP for Cape Breton-Canso. And in case you're not aware, he also covers the eastern part of Antigonish County. And over to the other side of the Chambers area, we have Central Nova's MP Sean Fraser. So MP Mike Kelloway, he's a first-time MP. Mr. Mike Kelloway hails from Cape Breton and pursued his graduate studies in education. During his formative years, he was able to discover his passions of social development, volunteerism, and community. His career has taken him from youth worker, entrepreneur, to college lecturer with NSCC. Kelloway was elected as a member of Parliament in 2019, and he currently sits as a member of the COVID-19 Pandemic Justice and Human Rights and Health Communities. And now, I think in the business, being Mike's first year in government, they call this birth by fire, and he's doing a pretty good job based on what I'm hearing. So,
thank you, John.
Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. And thank you for putting this together, the chamber, the audience, which I think we're up to 50 now, and Jeff and Sean. Statement of the obvious, COVID has had an enormous impact on Canadians and businesses across the country. There are significant pressures facing business owners right now. I know we'll hear many of those questions and comments today. And the effects, quite frankly, will be felt for months to come. Now, at the same time, businesses across Canada and Nova Scotia have stepped up to the plate to help critical sectors get the supplies and equipment they need. I think of a couple of examples of a company in my riding that is working on ventilators, another company that's looking at changing their operations to produce hand sanitizer rather, and also PPE equipment as well. So businesses are adaptable and versatile, as we all know. And many are changing how they operate and seeing maybe some new ways of doing things. However, at the same time, as we all know, people are very limited and businesses are very limited by the virus and how it impacts them. So let me talk to you about the approach of the federal government. So right from the get-go, and it's hard to believe it was only 8 weeks ago, the government decided to take a whole of government approach in responding to COVID-19. And as the virus evolves, you see this in policies and measures that come out to help sectors and individuals and different folks representing a broad spectrum of demographics. Case in point, it was 6 weeks ago, I believe, that our wage subsidy was initially at 10%. And then we moved it up to 75%. And recently we've extended it past June 6th. Utilizing Atlantic Canada Opportunity Agencies. We looked at today, the Prime Minister made an announcement about financing opportunities to businesses that can't access government supports that we put out in the recent weeks. So it evolves and we're evolving with it. And that whole government approach is essential in moving forward, and you'll continue to see that. I have to say though, it's forums like this, and I've taken part in a lot of Zooms that helps bring us together to get feedback from our shared communities to help drive the government response. And I'm sure Sean will speak to this, and Jeff. It's the response that we're getting back from our community that is really helping us provide recommendations to the concerns that are out there with the business sector, not-for-profit sector, you name it. And I actually believe that that those conversations, and in the case of COVID and the government's response, the federal government's response, it has been transformative. As a new MP, I've committed to engagement and proactivity on all fronts. I've been consumed, as you can imagine, with helping inform my colleagues and many folks in Ottawa of what's happening in our riding. And for them, I want to say thanks, and to the public servants, amazing group of individuals across this country. In particular, I want to thank Sean, who's on my speed dial quite a lot with respect to many different challenges and opportunities that my riding is facing, and not just the riding, but the province. So thank you for that, Sean. But chambers, this chamber and other chambers within the riding, I've seen you step up to the plate. I've seen you engage. I've seen you connect with businesses and people in your riding, and we need to do more of that. And MPs and MLAs and ministers, on whether you're a minister, as Jeff is with the provincial government, Sean is the parliamentary secretary to finance, mayors, wardens, councillors, you name it. I've been in contact with, and also the different sectors, whether it be the creative sector, the tourism sector, the fisheries sector. It's absolutely essential during this time that we maintain that connectivity, but also pass on those recommendations, as I mentioned. So, I'm looking forward to today to be here, to hear from you, to not just take questions, but to have a strong dialogue and a dialogue that I look forward to continuing after this session as well. Finally, the challenges we're facing are all too real. There's not one aspect of society that's not impacted by COVID. And we keep hearing the same message that, we'll overcome this together. And it's true. We will overcome this together, and staying close to each other and working together, breaking down silos that may have been there in the past. Well, there's no time for that now. We need to respond, and we have been responding, and we'll continue to respond. Again, I just do want to recognize Sean for his tireless efforts. He's not just taking my calls, by the way. He's taking the calls of MPs from across this country as a parliamentary secretary to finance. And he's been working hard to get many of the measures that you see across the finish line from a finance perspective, which is all of them. And I also want to thank Jeff. Jeff is a family friend and a strong minister, and working with him to collaborate wherever possible between both levels of government. And you've seen recently announcements that allude to the fact that we are indeed working together. So I just want to thank the Chamber and the guests for joining, and I look forward to your questions and discussion. Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Before we proceed over to Sean, I'm interested in polling in to all the people who are here. I'm interested in knowing, because Sean's going to talk a little bit about some of the federal government initiatives. I want to know if anybody has made any moves to proceed with applying or seeing some assistance with that. So you'll see a poll pop up in the middle of your screen. We're asking if those attending have accessed any of the current business programs being offered. So you can answer whether or not you have, or if you've had some difficulty, maybe not. And some of these programs may not apply to you in some cases. So you could just give a second and just chime in and let us know what you've been doing.
Thanks, John.
And Brian, I'll just get you to let me know when the results are in. So while we're doing that,
sure, John. It's about 35 of the 66 people have voted. We see that 36% have accessed some of the programs, while 30% have not. So there's a sort of even split there. And then there's also a concern there that none of the programs have been offered and applied to the current businesses that are involved here. So we'll go for a few more seconds here, and then we'll have the polling end, and we can move on to Sean.
Okay. I'm going to just, I want to introduce MP Fraser. So MP Fraser is very familiar with the local landscape and the people of Antigonish, growing up just one community over in Pictou County. Prior to running for office, MP Sean Fraser had a successful legal career. During this time, he acted as a research fellow with the Center for International Sustainable Development Law and provided pro bono legal services to those in the community who needed it most. Fraser was first elected as a Member of Parliament in 2015 and currently holds the positions of Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance and to the Minister of Middle Class Prosperity and Associate Minister of Finance. So with that,
thank you so much. And despite the lengthy introduction. I think most of you will know that it's first name basis for me works just fine. So Sean, for those of you who may have questions, thanks, Mike, for your overview of some of the motivations for this, and more than that, some of the work that you put in, particularly on behalf of those in the fishing community and seniors over the past while. Mike's right; he has been in my ear, but he's not even one of the bad ones. So you don't have to worry about that. I'll take maybe just 2 minutes to explain a little bit of the origins of some of the policies, and then do a bit of a deeper dive. And I will do my best to keep it to the 10 minutes I've been allotted, because I know people are more interested in their questions than hearing a speech. The starting point of this whole thing to me was sort of fascinating. I know that I'm still on video somewhere just a few months ago, sharing with Canadians on a national media broadcast that the risk to Canadians presented by coronavirus is low, according to public health advice. It wasn't a week later that Parliament was shut down, the NBA had canceled its season, and we all were in a period of lockdown of undetermined length. The weeks that followed that were some of the most fascinating and rewarding in my professional life to date, because we had a few days in particular where some of the conversations I was having were around the notion that people who were earning six figures 2 weeks before might have been in a bread line 2 months later. There was a few days in the depths of this before some of the policies landed where I was starting to wonder, are the banks going to be able to float the Canadian economy for us to preserve the network of businesses that keep us working and keep our families fed? Ultimately, what we decided to do was to say, whatever fiscal firepower we have left in the tank, how can we deploy it in a way that's going to give people the ammunition they need to hold their breath long enough to get through this public health emergency, so they can pick up as close to where they left off as possible once the public health threat has passed. We should not forget that without a solution to the public health emergency, there will be no economic recovery. It's essential that we continue to work towards following the public health advice, and I've got to compliment Minister MacLellan for the efforts of the provincial government to keep our communities apprised of what that advice should be on a daily basis during those press conferences. But I also want to remind people that if they have solutions on contact tracing and testing, get them to Mike's office, get them to my office, and to the extent that we can find funding to help develop solutions that will allow people to get into their community sooner, that is going to be what gets us back to work more quickly until a vaccine is developed. So please, if you're aware of solutions on the testing and contact tracing, that is going to be a very big deal that will separate one jurisdiction from the next in terms of who has a successful bounce back more quickly. But back to those early days, we realized very quickly that once we were in this period of lockdown, we were going to need to provide direct support to Canadian households. When I look down the street, except for the neighbors I have in Pictou County who are fortunate enough to work at Sobeys, which is one of the few Canadian companies that's actually doing better as a result of this lockdown, I looked at every other one of my neighbors and I realized that their cars weren't leaving the driveway in the morning, which means they weren't going to work. Half of them on the street are small business owners, and a number of them work for nonprofits that simply have completely lost their ability to fundraise, and in some cases have lost government funding. I realized pretty quickly that the first step we were going to have to do was going to be as basic as making sure people could put food on the table and keep a roof over their head. That was the origin point of the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which feels like an old familiar program to many of us now, but this was groundbreaking stuff just a few weeks ago. What we essentially established was a guaranteed paid leave for anyone who has had an interruption to their income. A little bit different than a universal basic income, which some people are still calling for, and I'm happy to get into that if you wish in the questions. But nevertheless, this is the kind of social policy reform that would usually take several years of consultation, and we had several days to not only create it, but to deliver it, to have people avoid a circumstance where they can't afford the basic cost of living. Very, very quickly after there was a number of other programs as well announced in those early days designed to get cash to people very quickly through existing mechanisms, whether it was the HST rebate, the Canada Child Benefit Enhancement, and so on, designed to make sure that we use whatever avenues we have to get money to households as quickly as possible. We like to think sometimes there's a send money now button at the Department of Finance's office, but that isn't the case. It takes a long time to build these systems. And at one point in time, the brand new system for this CERB was actually processing about 1,000 applications per minute. So far, we have somewhere in the ballpark of 40% of the Canadian workforce is actually claiming this benefit. That doesn't mean they're unemployed because they do have a job to go back to, so they're not looking for work, but it does mean that they're not working right now. So don't be fooled by an unemployment number in the ballpark of 15%. The number of people working is much smaller than that would suggest. And the only reason these people are able to, in many cases, continue to pay the bills is access to support of a different series of levels of government. But we realized pretty quick, once we took care of some income support for individuals, we had to pivot very quickly to support businesses who had fixed costs that were becoming due. And in many cases, because of decisions, appropriate decisions, I'd add, by the provincial government, they weren't allowed to do business for public health reasons. And so they're in a position where they have to pay bills, but they can't collect revenue. They needed our help. We stepped up initially with, as Mike pointed out, the 10% wage subsidy, and very quickly the magnitude of this crisis showed itself to be much greater than that would have helped. The first program that we really rolled out to deal with that was the 75% wage subsidy, which to employers who've had a serious shock to their revenue of 30% or more can claim this benefit to replace 75% of the wages paid directly to employees. This program, again, is meant to support those workers who won't have to claim the CERB if they get the wage subsidy. But we realize there's other fixed costs in addition to the wages that businesses have to pay as well. Obviously, things like utilities, whether it's heat or lights or internet or phone bills, things like rent. So we created the Canada Emergency Business Account as well, that is meant to help with those fixed costs through the form of a partially forgivable interest-free loan that's fully guaranteed by the government. It's being administered right across Canada, and including through credit unions, and over 500,000 Canadian businesses have now availed themselves of this program. If you qualify and you think you can use it, don't be shy about taking these benefits. Part of the reason we've created these benefits is to inject money into the economy at a time where we fear people won't be spending money. We do want money to continue to change hands and keep businesses afloat during this period of time. There are a series of other programs that we've established, some to inject liquidity into capital markets across Canada, some to help with commercial rent for those who've been hit absolutely the hardest, businesses that have closed completely, for example, additional programs to provide financing for very large businesses that have higher capital requirements. We've got a series of programs for young entrepreneurs, startup companies, and young entrepreneurs. I don't want to just talk at you guys. The website to go to if you're looking for some of these benefits in writing, canada.ca/coronavirus. It should be easy to remember. The provincial website is similar, novascotia.ca/coronavirus. Both of them are fairly well organized and provide reliable information with links. So again, canada.ca/coronavirus for a summary of all of the programs. There's quite a few other things that I could touch on, but I'd rather focus on your questions. But I will point out, and Mike sort of hit on this point a little bit during his opening remarks, we have chosen not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because speed in this case has proven to be the single most important element of our response. If we don't get money out the door quickly, because we want to develop a perfect program, we'll have a perfect program with a bunch of businesses that have gone bankrupt that won't be able to claim them. We realize that there are still gaps because of the speed that we've chosen to proceed with. We're continuing to adjust policies as need be to address those gaps. You've seen it with the CERB, with the $1,000 income allowance. You've seen it with the wage subsidy going from 10 to 75%. You've seen it with the emergency business account with a reduction of the payroll threshold from 50,000 to 20,000. You've seen further gaps through that emergency business account be partially remedied today with additional funding through a COA for businesses that don't otherwise qualify for the emergency supports. What we're trying to do is fill these gaps as quickly as we can. The way that we've identified solutions is through talking to one another. The number of conversations I've had with the finance minister or his senior staff that have been a direct conversation from local businesses in Antigonish, Pictou County, the Eastern Shores, St. Mary's, have actually really provided ammunition as recently as yesterday morning, where a senior staffer in the minister's office will say, "Holy smokes, you're blowing my mind. I didn't realize the solution was that simple. And I can tell you this one in particular came from Valentine's Cove." These are the kinds of conversations that really do help. I can't tell you what a resource. I like to give people hell a little bit like Mike when they call me and say, you got to stop bothering me so much. But in fact, they're providing solutions to problems that my constituents are facing. And in the absence of a several-year period to conduct a proper consultation where you consider every possible angle, an MP's office who's been bombarded with 300 or 400 calls a day about problems with programs is a very effective replacement if you want to have a proxy for that consultation process. So for those of you who are wondering if individual citizens or businesses can make a difference in federal policy formulation, I can tell you through personal knowledge over these past several weeks, nothing has made a bigger difference. So continue to work with your local representatives, reach out to my office, and though we're a bit jammed with capacity like everybody else in the world right now, we are still offering as full service as possible from our homes. And I want to say a big thank you to any of my staff that are on the line today. You guys have been godsends. You are a big part of the reason that there's businesses still open in our communities and people with income coming in. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and I look forward to what questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's time for another poll on federal programs. So I know everybody's been following all the changes that have been happening on an almost daily basis just to adapt to the changing business conditions and trying to make it fit. So here they are in front of you. You see a poll. It asks, which of the following federal programs will have the most impact for your business? So you can basically select the options that work for you. We're just going to take maybe 2 minutes to do that.
John, it's Mike. I just want to say this function of polling in real time, I haven't seen that. This is really neat.
I've got to hand it to Cody for providing us with the tool to make it happen. It's extremely useful to us as well. And Brian, when you're ready, maybe you could give us some insights.
Yeah, it seems like the emergency wage subsidy program has been most impactful, along with the CERB. The wage subsidy program, it's just 10% here, but obviously Sean just mentioned it's 75%.
Yeah.
28% of people have noted that 28% of the people who polled said that they don't think the programs are applicable to their business or doesn't apply to their sector. It could be a university or it could be a nonprofit there that might not have access to programs yet. So 41 of the 67 people have voted. So it's 61% of people have voted, which is probably better than most elections that we have as far as percentage of people able to vote and do. But you see a good response there, and I will end the polling and share some of the results there. So I don't know if John or Sean or Mike want to comment on that right there right for a minute, but
yeah, sure. It jumps out to me. It's really fascinating. You've seen when I described the response, I focused initially on the CERB and wage subsidy. We started with the programs that were designed to help the millions, and then focused on the thousands. And in some ways, we're now focusing on the remaining thousands or even hundreds. And obviously, the CERB with 7 million Canadians benefiting already, and the wage subsidy providing direct support of 75% of wages, it comes as no surprise that those two are the two of the three anchor programs to our economic response for Canadians. So I'm not surprised to see it, and in a lot of ways, I'm encouraged that in fact the biggest programs are having the biggest impact for businesses locally.
And just a comment from what I'm seeing too as well. So the emergency wage subsidy, I hope that's translating to how business is feeling. In other words, how things will continue to operate, because that's extremely important, to keep the economy floating through the social distancing restrictions that are in place.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on that? Okay. So we also have MLA Jeff McClellan here. He's another Cape Brettoner, right, Mike? Minister McClellan represents the area of Gleis Bay in his role as MLA. Prior to his career in politics, he spent his time in business development, then as a teacher and administrator at CDU. MacLellan was first elected to the Nova Scotia House of Assembly in 2010. He's held the positions as Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, Minister of Energy, Minister of Service Nova Scotia, Minister of Business, and Minister of Trade. MacLellan is currently the Minister of Business and Trade and is responsible for the Nova Scotia Department of Business. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everyone. Lindsay, your team, Sean and Mike, of course. I know I'm having nightmares about your voice in my head every day, especially you, Mike, with all due respect, but I guess that's the realities of consistency and repetition. Look, first of all, I like going first on these things because even though I usually don't have anything interesting to say, at least it's original the first time around. So after Sean and Mike, there's some overlap. So I'll just skate over those briefly. But look, as I've said this many times, and I know some of the audience here would have heard me say this. This has been policy on the fly like never before, and Sean touched on it. But the good news is before COVID, we rolled out a policy, an investment plan, a program of some sort. And we're ready for the criticism, those that it didn't help, the reasons why, sort of what the intent was. This is very different. Here it's, Sean said it best, roll it out the door as best you can, as quickly as you can, and wait for the feedback, the tweaking, so to speak, and then, put it out again. So that's really what we've done on a number of things. And I think that getting, again, conversations like this, I will also echo Mike's thoughts around the poll. This is fantastic. Quite frankly, I wish every Zoom call and every interaction had this in real time, because it not only helps sort of the conversations I'm going to have with the Premier and the Deputy Minister and the government, it helps me right now sort of, frame my remarks and then the Q&A. So very helpful. And I think that just in the last one there with the federal programs, I think that the rent piece is a great example. That the intention of that is fantastic with the federal government, of course. We had the rent deferral program in place, but we'll obviously partner with this one. But we're hearing in different provinces and in territories that it doesn't fit quite the same way, and there's basically 13 different permutations and combinations around how that would work best. So what the feds have said basically is, all right, let's hear the plan and we'll go from there. So that's as valuable as we can be as partners federally and provincially, and we'll continue to do that. And I think that having businesses in the economy recognize that none of these things come out perfect, but we work towards perfection as comments come in. That's really the key. I won't go too much into the specifics of our programs. I only have a few minutes, but I'll wait for that for the Q&A. But it's been tough, folks, and I know I'm elected 10 years now, and this is by far the biggest crisis, hands down. But we've had some microcosm of things that have happened, sort of, in society from a public health perspective, disasters, things of that nature. There's always an overarching patience and understanding in the beginning, because it's human interest and it's public health and it's safety and those things. But then as time goes on, that really changes, and people become increasingly worried, afraid, desperate, frustrated, all of those things. And obviously, again, this will be the biggest example of that. As COVID kind of gets under control, so to speak, we do have a long way to go, no question, when it comes to the economy. But from a public health perspective, we get down the road of treatments and vaccinations and such, and the slow reopening. It's only now that we're going to really, really focus all attention on that economic rebuild and that rebirth. And that really, for me, from day one, I really am a glass is half empty. I knew we would get the public health piece under control. I was always worried about what was going to happen tomorrow and the next day and the next day. I'm still in that mode. So as we sit here today, I'm increasingly worried about trade, about fisheries, about tourism, about all those key pillars that are really looming, that we haven't dealt with the crisis yet. So really, we've done 3 phases, and the first one, of course, was that public health order that Sean had referenced. That was the key most unfortunate, obviously, group of section of the economy that was hit first, those ordered to close. So, grants, deferrals, and loans and things. And again, I'll answer any questions specifically, but those programs were geared to that group first. Then it became about those who their revenues were decimated, but they were still open. You think retail is the easiest example, but there are many. You're in a shopping mall or in a standalone retail outlet, and you are open and you're able to collect revenue in theory. But everyone, including the director of public health and the chief medical officer and the premier, are saying, stay the blazes home. So it's pretty hard to make revenue. And look, everyone's recognized that, from the premier on his side to the retail owners. But now it's getting to a point of desperation. So again, some of the sort of the middle programs for us were geared to try to bridge the gap to that group. And by the way, too, this is not, once we roll things out, just like the feds, it's not the be all end all. This is it. Here's your money. Good luck. We know that at every juncture, there's got to be more thought put into where we are today, what the trajectory looks like. So it's never been, here's $5,000 cash and a grant. Hopefully you survive. It's always, here it is for now. Pay the bills as best you can. Here's the other things we can offer. Here's how we dovetail with the feds. And let's see where we are in a week, in 10 days, in 2 weeks. So that's really been sort of the focus for that second phase. And again, the third group is based around that large scale, the long-term economic effect felt by those who haven't been hit yet. So when you total all that up, folks, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of concern. So that's where we were in terms of policy. For us, on the small and medium business side, it was cash, quite frankly. And on the bigger picture, we know that, big employers that have been hit hard, at least they have sort of that, balance sheet, income statement type structure where they can carry credit. A pizza shop, a cosmetology site in Glace Bay, they can't, establishing loans and credit doesn't help them, because it's either now or then. So that's a different conversation. So that's really what we've tried to gear to. So that's really been the phases. On the reopening plan, I guess this is where, again, I sort of, was predicting and waiting on the uncertainty and the criticism that would result when you compare jurisdictions. Again, with absolute, respect and deference to the other provinces and territories, we've done the slowest walk of any. If you look at, those who support or proponents of COVID exists, it is what it is, let's open the economy. We're probably not in their favor in terms of how we've done it. But when you look at the public health side, I think people recognize that Nova Scotia has been prudent on it. And the reality is, folks, we're not committing to public health over the economy. There's a fine line. There's a sweet spot. And I think that if we were to just blast open the doors now, who's shopping? Who's coming in? There's no one coming through there's not going to be a tourism sector at this point right now today, just no matter what we do. With the airports, with the ferry, with the highways, with the borders, with all contact points outside of Nova Scotia, there's no market to access at this point. So there's this fine line, and I think that when you look at other jurisdictions, there's a lot of confusion. And I know that we all follow the media. We're astute to what's happening, and although Quebec and Ontario and the big players are opened up, quote unquote, I don't think people really understand what that even means. And this is not a certain time to for anybody. So again, I mean that with respect, but it really is jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and we got to do what's in the best interest. I'm really eager to open the economy. Folks, Stephen McNeil is really eager to open the economy. So, with some of the back and forth around Dr. Strang's presentation, and which was, a worst case scenario, providing or applying national guidelines and standards around testing and tracing, that gave a picture of what it could look like. But that doesn't mean it is what it is. And again, these are day-by-day conversations. The reality is, for us, for Sean and Mike and I, and for the municipal governments as well, the longer we go in restriction lockdown, quite frankly, and I don't want to sound crass, but this is just the truth, the more expensive it's going to be for government to try to keep everybody afloat. So I would much rather have the economy, all sectors making money, profiting, rolling, keeping their people hired, than to keep things shut down and have to look at additional supports. But again, that's something that we have to do, and it's going to be a fine line between when we smooth that out and go from, okay, let's open cautiously and make sure that we're making the right decisions and not having a second spike. So it's all been a balancing act from that perspective. Now I'll just finish with a couple things. On the micro level, the economy is going to be okay. There's pent up demand in some sections that are really going to, have a positive impact. And Sean referenced grocery stores are one. When you look at tourism, when you look eventually at our exports, what we export is going to be coveted. But you know what? That's a micro level. That's a textbook definition of what the economy will recover. I'm more worried about the macro. People are going to be devastated by this. Local businesses are going to go down. People are going to have their life savings flushed if they haven't already. And it's scary. As I always say, we're in critical roles, but this is my job. For private sector operators and small businesses, this is life and death financially. So I think that, while that's great that there's going to be some pent up demand, it's keeping everybody whole as best we can. That's key. Again, I want to say that partnerships federally, provincially, municipally, with groups like you folks in Antigonish and all across the province, the feedback is absolutely critical. So again, your polling here, the CFIB information that we've been gleaning has been invaluable for us in terms of policy formation. And it's when you look at the polling across the provinces and territories in terms of business supports, I can tell you that I'm on national calls with my colleagues. They've done far less per capita than we have, and that's just the truth. That's not a political statement or trying to puff my chest here, but that's the reality. The federal government has done more from a per capita basis than it's off the charts in terms of the expenditure now and what's going to happen. So I think that what we're doing is the best we can do at this point. It's definitely not perfect. There's going to be a lot more work down the road. But I think that, if we stick together on this, we'll come out with the best possible outcome. So again, the value for me in this conversation, other than seeing you and interacting, is what comes from the people on the phone and in the Q&A and in the following comments. So don't underestimate the importance of this for Sean, Mike, myself, and the municipal reps who are here as well. So thanks for this, and I look forward to Q&A. I know if we're short on time, if you want to send them directly to us, we'll get you answers. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's that time again. Brian's going to put up a poll on provincial programs. And we're going to ask again if you've considered or you've looked into those. So we're asking, which of the following provincial programs have the most impact on your business? So if you're aware of them, great. Tell us which ones apply to you or have an impact. If you don't know, let us know that too. So we're going to take a couple minutes, and then Brian's going to throw the results up for you.
Sure. So the initial results so far, we have 24 people who've weighed in, and by far the bottom layer there, not applicable or other, is leading the way at 50% or so. Just a lot of uncertainty, people not being sure as well. And then the small business impact grant would be having an impact at 22% right now.
Sorry, Brian, could I get you to put that up for us, please?
Sure. Let's let a few more seconds for people to poll there. So okay, so there you can see the results. I don't know if Jeff or anyone else has any comments to make.
Yeah, that'd be great. Listen, that breakdown and sort of the the distinction between them makes perfect sense. As I referenced, so you look at just one example, the small impact rent deferral. That was, I think there was 1,000 tenants that took that opportunity. But I think now with the federal program, and we're back and forth with each other just to sort of make a few adjustments, I can assure you that, and I know this is our group, but just across, for me, I look at this and reflect it across the board for Nova Scotia. I think that this is applicable for what is being experienced. The small business rent program, deferral program, those numbers I think will change in terms of access when we get aligned with the federal program. Procurement opportunities haven't hit the street yet in terms of what's coming, so that makes sense. You know, and the credit union program is pretty much brand new as well. So this is important, and I think that if we were to do this a couple of weeks from now, or at least I would hope, you would see different numbers and sort of more access. Obviously, for me, the most concerning numbers are the bottom two, not sure, and of course, they're not applicable, because if people need help, we want to be applicable. So.
Okay. Someone asked, and I know we're holding questions to the end, but someone asked where they could get more information about the procurement program. So we will have information on the website about that, but is there additionally some place they can go?
So not at this point. I think that you've got some good insiders just to put the procurement program in the list. I think there's a lot upcoming from a number of procurement angles. One is obviously the normal capital program, which you'll see some additions to. There's the COVID sort of procurement program, as well as some other pillars of that as well. So there's nothing sort of finalized yet. That's imminent though. So I think that once we lock that down, we can get it to you and you can share with the members for sure.
Great, thank you.
John, just a quick word. Federally, there's been a lot of effort to ramp up domestic production efforts as well, particularly on equipment or supplies that relate to the COVID-19 response. All of the information on what we're looking for right now, buyandsell.gc.ca is the federal government's procurement site. Same site we use in non-emergency situations to have one-stop shopping, whether it's emergency related or not. That again, buyandsell.gc.ca.
All right, next I'm going to ask our municipal units to kind of chime in and tell us basically what they're observing in the community, specifically business community, but more generally when it relates to COVID-19, where they sort of see things going in the next number of months. It's a two-part question, and then I'll ask you to tell us what you're doing to help with the effort of assisting businesses. So we'll start off with Mayor Laurie Boucher, please.
Great, thank you very much, John, and thank you to Lindsay as well for bringing us here today, and also to from Brian and his team from CODI, which is you know, serving a new purpose in our community with bringing us together to have these kind of forums. Kate Gorman as well from the Town of Antigonish, along with Laura Bray, has been working very closely with John and the Chamber, and we really appreciate the work that they do as well. Over the last 7 to 8 weeks, we've seen major changes within our community, not only our community, but the province and the country for that matter. It's kind of neat to see that the problems we're having here in our small community of Antigonish is the same across not only the country, but the world. And so it kind of makes us feel that there is something that we can do, and everybody's kind of on the same page, same playing field. So the way that we're moving around the community has changed, but although these are really hard decisions to make, we do them because we want to protect our families and our friends and our most vulnerable, and we can't forget why we're doing this as well, is to make sure that the emergency pressure on our hospital and for frontline workers, we are able to slow everything down so we're able to absorb that pressure and that stress. The businesses that were forced to make quick decisions, how quickly this came up and to impact their bottom line and their employees, and just had to make decisions that nobody ever thought they would have to make, especially as Sean mentioned at the beginning of his comments, how fast it came in at the beginning. We didn't realize, I'm sure the students from St. Yves didn't realize that they wouldn't be returning when they went home for break, but that's the way it turned out. We understand that people are wondering when things are going to get back to normal and what that normal is going to look like, and that's kind of what we want to project down the road. But I'd like to just take a second too to talk about the provincial and the federal governments, and they were so quick to respond, and I'm grateful for their support and how they've made the programs available to both residents and business owners. They both, everybody did mention feedback is very important, and I'd have to note that the response to the feedback has been very good, especially for the people that are receiving the benefits and are taking advantage, are able to take advantage of the programs, how fast they're working on their feedback, and it'll just show you that you know, both our provincial and federal government are committed to not only helping Antigonish, but helping the entire country, province and country. So, you know, there is a silver lining on this. I compare it to Tale of Two Cities. There's some things that we've seen in our community that has been fantastic. The business people, the ability to change and how they're delivering their product. We see it anywhere from Gabrio's and some of the other restaurants in our town to smaller business that are doing small curbside pickup. Social media has been huge in this, so we are adapting, and so that's a good thing. The generous donations from all of the community to the less fortunate or more vulnerable, the frontline workers at the hospital, how they're being treated, and the appreciation that our fellow community members are showing for our frontline workers is remarkable. So we do have a lot of people that are committed now to shopping local, and then they realize that local small business is the backbone of our community. And so, you know, when I'm out for my early morning walk and I see, or an evening walk, and I see the streets very vacant, it makes me sad, but then it also makes me proud that the people of Antigonish are really listening to our leaders, both federally and provincially, and heeding the recommendations, and so that's a good thing. That's not to say that there's many concerns. You know, we just lost probably one of the biggest days for economic benefit in Antigonish, and that would be St. FX graduation. So that really hurt us, that we didn't see people walking down the street, patronizing our businesses. The restaurants are usually full. And that's probably the first big one that we've seen along the way, and there's more to come. The Highland Games have been officially canceled. We look at what tourism is going to the summer. Festival Antigonish Summerfest has also been canceled. What's tourism going to look like for this summer? So there's a lot of concerns, there's a lot of questions, and I understand people's anxiety, because I have it myself for sure, but we are a resilient community, and I think that together we'll get through it. We go into this knowing that we did do the right thing. And it's not over yet by far, because we did this to keep our community safe. And we also know that we will see the impact going for quite a while. Not just now, but over the next 12 to 24 months for sure. We're going to have to find a way to change the things that we're doing, and that's why we're here today. Our town and our partners are here today to help in whatever way we can. And I really can't stress enough the importance of giving feedback and giving ideas, like everybody has said prior to me, but because the response has been very good. And so I'll stop there, and I'll let Owen take over.
Thanks. Sure, Owen, if Warden of Antigonish County, if Warden could say a few words, Owen could say a few words rather about what the county has been observing among constituents and what your response has been to that.
Thank you very much, John. And I'd like to start off by certainly welcoming our colleagues, both provincially and federally, and tell you the importance of that support from the other two levels of government to us during this time has been incredible. And we have weekly meetings, and we've had weekly meetings with both Sean and Mike on a number of issues, and it's given us an opportunity to kind of get a first-hand view of some of the programs that are available to our constituents. And through this pandemic, it came on so quick. There's obviously a lot of impacts, and they will be far-reaching. However, the stimulus that's been put out there certainly has taken some of the pressure off. What it's going to look like 2 years out, at this point, it's a guess, but we're certainly hopeful as a municipality that things will level and that we'll come out of this here better than we might have thought at the beginning. I think when we look at our county, and we're seeing a lot of businesses that have contracted, and they're just hunkering down for now. But there's certainly an optimism about what's going to happen going forward. We take the opportunity with the Chamber's information. We're following that closely as well. And as new programs are rolled out, we're actually getting that information out to our constituents. And looking at this here, we've certainly seen some amazing things happen as a result of this. I think people have slowed down a little bit and realized the importance of looking out for their neighbors and stepping up at times when you might be just a bit too busy to do that. So that's one of the good things that has evolved from this pandemic. We look at our community as well, and over the past 2 months, I'd say it's been pretty amazing. We've seen a lot of businesses step up, just simple things like providing some box lunches for our healthcare workers. And those are little things that mean a lot to the people that have to show up for work that didn't have an option of staying home or hunkering down at home. So that's something that, of real importance to us. We also look at the supporting local. I think this here highlights now more than ever the importance of supporting local. And our farmers market in the last 2 weeks have had a nice run of putting product out, and they've done it in a way that people drive in, place orders in advance, drive in. And it's just tremendous to see the number of people that are showing up to support that. I look at Steinhardt's distillery out in Airstag in the early days, come up with the idea of creating some hand sanitizer. So these are creative ideas that situations like this actually make us, make our community stronger and really showcase the ability to adapt. And I think our communities have done that. One of the things as a municipality we see critically important, we have a strong small business sector within the whole region. We have a strong construction industry. And so we've been putting out some work, and we just completed a budget of $4.2 million of capital expenditures for this year. And so tenders are going out. We see it critically important to have that sector of our economy moving. And with the loosening of some of the restrictions, it's going to allow construction companies to get going. But these are meaningful jobs at a time that are critically important. And I know we certainly are looking forward to working with both the province and the federal government to look at other programs that we can enhance more of those types of expenditures, because they're real jobs and they spend good money and it's spent locally. So we're certainly trying to do our part to make sure we get some of these projects off the ground ASAP. And so that was, one of the reasons we announced such an aggressive capital plan for the county for this year. So these are a few things that we're doing to try to get the economy, that sector of the economy going. I think of our frontline workers during this whole thing, and that goes from our healthcare workers to our grocery store clerks, to our truckers, to our farmers, the people help keep the supply chain going and operating, and they never missed a beat. And there's been lots of people giving them thanks, and they deserve every bit of that, because they were the ones that had no choice. You still have to feed your community, you still have to take care of the sick, so, and the products have to come in, and they don't come in by themselves. So the trucking community stepped up enormously to help out. But there is going to be challenges, like the mayor said earlier, something like the university. The impact of the university on the economy of Antigonish Town and County is huge. So how that looks in 2 months or 4 months, I guess we're all going to be waiting to see. But, obviously we want to see things get back to normal, but it has to be done safe. And I think the Premier and Dr. Strang have communicated consistently the importance of getting this pandemic flattened and getting back safely. So we're certainly, as anxious as everybody else to see things start to return to some sort of normal. But the real normal, I don't believe will be felt until there's a vaccine that takes care of this pandemic. So as a municipality, we're going to continue to work. You know, we kept our essential services going, garbage collection, our water sewer operations never missed a beat. Our staff, we were able to get them set up to work from home, and we're about 3 weeks behind on probably getting our tax rate set, but we're going to work with our community and see how that unfolds, because in terms of collection, we don't really know what that's going to look like until the tax bills go out, and we'll see, and then we'll gauge the temperature of the community at that point. And I know the province has put out a program, and we're looking at possibilities within that program to support both residential and our business community. So those are a few things we're working on, and we're certainly going to make sure we work closely with our partners at all levels of government to try to get through this, and we will get through it. It's just going to look a bit different. So I'll stop there and turn it back to you. Thanks, John.
Thanks a lot, Owen. Basically, there was a couple of speakers who mentioned the reopening process. I know Dr. Strang talked about a 5-phase reopening process that we're hopefully going to be getting into soon. I'm interested in knowing, you know, as many of the listeners here would be today, I just want to know what sort of the feeling is about reopening at this point. I'm going to get Brian to throw up a poll, and I want to gauge the folks who are here to find out how you're feeling about reopening at this point in time. And there'll be a follow-up question to that. So I'm just going to get Brian to throw that up really quick for a minute. As federal and provincial governments consider how to ease self-isolation measures, what is your biggest concern right now? We'll use this information to communicate back to you and back to the chamber membership what you really want to know as you work to reopen your business and develop your reopening plan. So have a quick look and tell us what you think. Okay, so there's some need for information here. It looks like people are wanting to know how they're able to operate within potential restrictions and guidelines. 43% of folks responded that way. Worker safety, safety of clients, also key concerns, and the timing involved.
Someone
Jeff,
just
can I
noted it
get
would
you-
be handy. Oh, sorry. Someone noted it would be handy to be able to select more than one item during these polls, because there's more than one that applies as well.
Okay.
For future, Brian.
I think the previous
Yeah.
ones. I think the previous ones had multiple choice. I just didn't click that box off of this one, so my apologies.
Okay.
Forgive me
John?
this time.
Yes.
Yeah, if I can, just in response to that, I said off the top, this is exactly what I was referring to. It's the long-term economic reality, and I know it's so cliche to say the new normal, but it's a cliche for a reason. And it's going to be part of a different world when we come out of this, and it'll be, you know, back to normal in some senses. But when you think about social interactions, when you think about, you know, the ebb and flow of customer traffic, sports events, things like that, it's just not going to be the same. So if we, and again, I referenced about that sweet spot of, you know, of the rebirth of the economy, but just, you know, use one example. All of us, think about your favorite restaurant that you go to. It's when the economy reopens, it's not going to be like it was before COVID. We don't walk in and we're, you know, sitting side by side and waiting in a waiting area with 10 other people and going in groups of 12. It's not going to be that for quite some time. I think that, as Owen referenced, that's vaccination land. So until that point, and even then, I think that, you know, it's not, people aren't viewing this as there's not going to be another COVID. It's never going to happen again. I think that, you know, what the science has been signaling for a decade or more is that this is going to be more common for a number of reasons. So I think that we'll get through this, particular set stages and phases as best we can. And that's going to be, I don't want to put a timeline out, but that'll be a number of months before we slowly sort of, reemerge and have some level of economic normalcy. But I'm way more concerned about the long-term trajectory and how this changes. And again, just put your mind to, as the example, put your mind to a restaurant. It's not going to be like it was.
Okay. So with that, maybe I'll ask another question, which is how prepared are people to respond to that, to the reopening process, which is going to be very, very different from any way they've ever operated. So, Brian, can you throw that up for me, please? How have you prepared to keep open or reopen your business? So there is multiple choice. You can select several. Dr. Strang, I believe, mentioned a few times the necessity of people to have a reopening plan. How you're going to operate, he didn't mention this, but there is the factor of where PPE is going to come in. How do you protect your employees and the general public? All considerations. So are you prepared to do what's necessary to open? And you'll see a number of options.
And so the responses keep coming in, so we'll give it a few more seconds here. It seems like many of us are working on the required guidelines plan, and a good percentage are already open within current guidelines. So it's 32% there, and then 35% are working on their plans. And so the voting slowed down, so I'll share that poll now.
That's great. That's great. It's nice to see people being proactive and getting it figured out.
John, I think Lindsay has some questions that we can maybe throw out before as people look at this and we go for it, I guess.
Yep, absolutely. So if we want to start the first round of questioning, we'll go ahead. We're going to go through the chat box, myself and Lindsay. And Lindsay, if you'd like to present the first question.
Sure.
Okay.
This one goes back to the beginning as an anonymous question. As a sole proprietors who use their personal name and not a business name do not require a business registration number. Both my accountant, when I was setting up, and the bank endorsed this when I set up my business. From what I've seen, all supports require your business ID. Suggestions for this?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this question, and I think I may try to answer two questions at once because there's a related one that just came in from Brendan Ahern as well. Around the Canada Emergency Business Account. That's one of, there's a few programs that have specific eligibility requirements that have hampered the ability of some small businesses to access the program. The payroll threshold requirement for the emergency business account or the requirement that there be a business account provide examples of those criteria that I know are causing some heartburn for local businesses. Some of the changes that have been made have sought to broaden the scope, like the reduction of the payroll from 50,000 to 20,000. So although it may not be quite the same scale of problem it was before, I know that there's still a number of businesses that don't have access to the problem. Before I get to the solution, I think it's helpful to highlight a justification for why there is a requirement of a business account or a payroll threshold at the outset. Some of these measures are designed to either protect these programs against abuse by organized crime or to limit the access to the program to businesses that don't necessarily need it. One of the examples I can think of, if you think of someone who holds a passive investment corporation that has no overhead, I'm sure they would love to have an interest-free $40,000 loan and $10,000 of which is converted to a grant. But if we open the change by simply allowing businesses with a personal account or that pay through dividends, that would expand the number of businesses that would have access to the program from the current, I think it's a little more than 500,000 today, to about 2 million businesses. And when we know we want to deploy the cash in a way that reaches people's kitchen tables and businesses' bottom line, we don't necessarily want to be cutting checks with the same pot of funds we can use for businesses to some businesses that don't have any overhead and in fact are doing just fine with their investments. So we're trying to fill that gap that we know exists. This morning, for those businesses that don't qualify for some of these other supports, a new fund, I forget the name, I think is the Regional Policy and Regional Relief and Recovery Fund is the name, was announced. And businesses who do not otherwise qualify for the emergency supports that have been announced should contact ACOA. If you actually were to Google ACOA, A-C-O-A, you would get their website, and it's the most recent press release they've put out just this morning. There's $110 million specifically for businesses in Atlantic Canada that's primarily designed to target those businesses that don't otherwise qualify for supports. We are still looking at other solutions to make sure that those businesses that really do have fixed costs that they can't handle have support, but we don't necessarily want to make changes to certain rules that would create other unintended consequences that would prevent us from supporting other kinds of businesses or open the programs to abuse by organizations that we don't want to have access, such as organized crime. So it's difficult to find the right policy solve. If it was easy, we would have done it a while ago. We do want to make sure support reaches those businesses with real fixed costs that have cash flow problems, and it's a matter of figuring out the right solution. But please contact the local ACOA office if you're looking for information on how to tap into this new program.
Do you want me to go with the next question, John?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Outside of mortgage deferrals, which come with a significant cost down the road, are there any financial supports available for rental property owners that are not operating through incorporated companies?
Sorry, I don't know who's this one's directed towards. Is this Jeff? I saw you kind of motioning as well.
Yeah, could you just elaborate on, so what are we talking here? What kind of structure in terms of a rental? Are we talking Airbnb or a bed and breakfast, or what's the?
Maybe we could, okay, do you want to unmute that person?
Yeah.
I can scroll up to try and find it.
Yeah, just trying to find the name of the person who asked that question.
That's,
so I can unmute them.
that would be Lenita.
Okay. Hey, Lenita, you should be able to talk. If you unmute yourself.
Property owners that may own one or two properties, not necessarily incorporated companies, but we do have limited available housing, and I'm just concerned about these property owners and their ability to carry on and move through this if those tenants are not necessarily in a position to be paying rent. I think there are some property owners that are finding that situation where some of their tenants don't qualify for the CERB. So it was just a general question, because it's been something that's popped up in conversation with different folks that I know.
I know for Sean or Mike, you can maybe address the CERB if that's applicable. I think for us, if you want to just go through the team here, it would be Lindsay or John, and just give me some of the details around that, because I don't know. I never really thought about the specific formal requirement for incorporation to access either the rent deferral program or the new one that we're kind of working towards. That we are in agreement in principle, obviously, with the feds, but just working on some details. So, point well taken, and that will be. Obviously, that's an example of someone who doesn't have the ability to pay rent if their job is impacted. But again, to your point, if the CRB is applicable to that, maybe there's a challenge with that aspect of it. But if you want to just get me any specifics, and just to reframe it in terms of those who aren't incorporated, and it doesn't have to be the name of the person, and I'll be happy to dig in.
John, if I can just add something to that, please. So if we were looking at rentals within the town of Antigonish, I can tell you that what the town plans to do is take part in the provincial government by Jeff and his team to take advantage of the property tax financing program. So this is where the province rolled out a $380 million loan program to municipalities, and our municipality is going to take advantage of this and hopefully be able to pass on some of this to our people paying taxes within the town of Antigonish, both residential and commercial. So there will be certain criteria to meet. Those are not laid out yet. Our staff is working on it as we speak, and hoping to have something to us for our next meeting, which will be the end of May. So that's one of the things that we're doing as well. And when we talk about some of the rental units within the town of Antigonish, I believe this may be what Lenita might be talking to, is people that own 3 or 4 different units, not maybe a big company, but meanwhile they still have to pay their mortgage, but their rent is not coming in, the revenue is not coming in, and still expect to pay taxes. So if you qualify for this program, that is one of the things that the town will do as well.
There's sort of a side question to this, maybe a second parter. It says, why are big banks only deferring principal and continue to charge interest, but credit unions have deferred both?
Happy to offer a little bit of insight on it. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that a handful of the policies or programs you've seen rolled out have been by provincial and federal governments. But the measures that have been implemented by the major financial institutions in Canada have largely been at their own accord. So the deferral of mortgages on a case-by-case basis is actually something that banks often do on their own with tenants who are, or borrowers who are in distressed circumstances. They've announced publicly, and I mean, there's been conversations certainly with the federal government on the kinds of things they can do, so we're not duplicating our efforts, but are complementing one another. The banks have essentially said, we're going to, on our own accord, offer a 6-month deferral on a case-by-case basis as is needed. Credit unions competing in the same marketplace have kind of put their hand up and said, we're going to go one step further. There hasn't been a single rule that applies, to my knowledge, to all credit unions. They're able to change their rates as they see fit. There's been a similar dissonance between the major credit card companies and credit unions that offer that kind of a service, where some have taken their interest down to 0, whereas the major companies have cut them in half. One of the things that I think is important to keep in mind, right now, our bank, and I'm not somebody who's usually beholden to whatever the big banks say go. Right now, though, there's a very unique challenge. People think that the bank is getting a lower rate of interest in the money that they owe because of the Bank of Canada's rate has gone down. It's really important that people understand that's not the case. The cost of borrowing for banks has actually just gone through the roof. They get their money from 2 sources, deposits and from money they borrow. The money that banks are borrowing right now is at a much higher rate than it was a couple of months ago. The reason being, they have a lot of money that's gone out the door that they may never get back in mortgages that were issued before this crisis hit, business loans, whatever the case may be. So the banks are doing what they can to help their clients survive, really on their own accord, not what the government's done, while at the same time trying to protect their systemic financial risk. The credit unions, because they typically operate on a more local level, are better able to manage their risk. So to the extent that the Burgeoning Credit Union in Antigonish is able to offer services that beat the bank, it's probably because they're not facing the same systemic risk that the major chartered financial institutions are facing right now.
And just if I can add some color around the credit union piece, I don't, anyone that's on the call that's connected to the Credit Union Atlantic, the co-op network, They have been absolutely phenomenal partners for us from a provincial perspective. The co-op council has been outstanding. The whole credit union or network organization have worked with us, and I think that probably the distinction for the purpose of that question, there's a bit of a difference. I'm not sure with the across the board typical loans and mortgages and such that the credit union does. I'm not sure what they're doing in terms of deferrals for principal and interest, but I can tell you the $70 million relationship we have with them, that's part of the agreement between ourselves and CUA. So we have a $50 million loan program. That's one that we backstop. They take on a little bit more risk than the commercial banks would consider, and we backstop the difference. With the new money, it's one of our programs that was identified in the multiple choice list there a few minutes ago, but that's a $20 million specifically COVID stream. It's for any employer, $20,000 or less payroll, up to a maximum $25K grant loan. Also a grant for $1,500 and a voucher for business improvement planning for $1,500. That's all subject to deferral for principal and interest. That's part of our agreement. So if you fall under any of that 70 million, your deferrals are built into that program. But again, the commercial banks and any politician trying to explain, Sean, in fairness to you, why commercial banks have to do what they do, it's pretty much a loser. It's a tough one to explain, and the balance sheets are complex, and people think that they can eat this money. And I'm not saying whether they can or can't. It's just that's a bit of a tricky one. But again, to Sean's point, the credit unions are built in a different way, and they've been absolutely phenomenal. So if you know anyone in that credit union world, pass on our appreciation, because they're a difference maker for a lot of people, particularly in this COVID situation.
Maybe a question to follow up on that. I'm not sure if I just interrupted someone. I apologize. Will credit card interest rates, is there going to be a push to reduce interest rates from the federal government as well?
We've seen through a series of sort of conversations that I mentioned previously that they have, most major credit card companies have cut their rates in half, and some credit unions have eliminated interest altogether. I don't anticipate that most of these things are going to be made permanent. We don't currently have a plan in the works to legislate interest-free credit cards or anything like that. To the extent that we're trying, believe it or not, we're actually trying not to interfere with parts of the economy that can still operate in efficient markets on their own. We're interfering where we see that there are very serious gaps. It becomes trickier if we start to mandate specific parts of the economy get a break here and there. The approach that we've taken instead is to realize that Canadians are facing all kinds of different fixed costs, and it's much simpler and more effective for us to provide direct income support to help Canadians with those costs. So for one family who may rent an apartment and have a credit card bill, the CERB is designed to help them with some of those costs, but it's also designed to provide support to somebody who might not have a credit card but has a mortgage bill to pay down. So we're not trying to siphon off the one-by-one fixed costs that households receive. It would become an administrative and logistical nightmare, and half the program funding could be eaten up by the delivery of benefits. Instead, we've tried to go for a universal solution to the extent we can by providing direct income support to households, regardless of what their expenses are, if they've had an interruption to their income.
Thank you. Conti, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Jeff for clarifying that, and to Sean the question. My business, because we have to continue to pay the interest for the year, the next 12 months, the total interest we'll be paying is around 139,000. Last year, April, we did 209,000. This April, we did 11,000 in sales. So every month, the negative cash flow. And yesterday, CBRE came out with the most detailed future scenario, where they're saying it will be up to 30 months for hotel and the restaurant, to get back to normal, but at a higher operating cost forever. So if I have to manage my negative cash flow, I have to get additional loan. And again, to pay my interest, I have to get a loan and pay a second interest. So, 5 years from now, this might be a big ethical question. So, since this forum is here, this really needs to be thought through. There might be a better way to disperse the additional loan to manage businesses, maybe through CRA or something else. But there is no explanation where a credit union has a different policy than banks that are far larger than these local banks. I think it's a huge problem.
Yeah, and at a certain point in time, if it's the kind of thing that persists for more than a few months, I think you'd actually start to see them start to steal clients from major financial institutions. I think the power of the marketplace is a very real thing. I think given the scale of certain kinds of investments, a credit union might not be necessarily the right place for an individual business or for certain kinds of investments that have a higher risk profile and no relationship with the borrower. I think it might be helpful, rather than getting into too detailed a discussion about this potential ethical issue, which will reveal itself in the coming months and years. If we wanted to do a follow-up personally after this, I'd be happy to make myself available for a call in the days to come if you wanted to send something to our office.
Okay, we have another interesting question here from Dan that says, is any consideration being given to rejigging insolvency legislation to give insolvent businesses time to redefine their business plan?
I hate to jump in and try to answer every question first here. If anybody else wants to take a stab, please put your hand up. Right now, I think the message that I would leave you with is the two messages to respond initially are, one, our focus right now is, to the extent possible, to, rather than rejig the insolvency proceedings or legal regime, to prevent as many businesses as possible who are otherwise structurally sound from falling into insolvency or bankruptcy proceedings in the first place. Of course, there will be some businesses impacted that close over this, that go into receivership or insolvency proceedings. And the second point is that nothing has been taken off the table in terms of our federal response to date. But until we have a firmer handle on the emergency response and those measures that are going to help businesses from falling into bankruptcy and insolvency in the first place, I expect serious legislative reform to the Bankruptcy Insolvency Act, for example, will probably come at a later time. And I don't think we have a full appreciation quite yet as to what the needs will be. I think if there are individual cases where businesses are having difficulty with federal legislation, please contact me or Mike, as the case may be, and to the extent you identify solutions that would actually buy you the kind of time you need to get your plan in order to bounce back, that's the kind of thing we'd like to help you out with. In terms of a wholesale review of the legislation, I think that would be undertaken potentially after we understand the scale of the need that will reveal itself as a result of this pandemic.
And
Chris, did you have a question? Oops, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
Nope. Okay. There is a follow-up question here I'd like to just add in there as well. There's limited information on provincial business loans from the credit unions. Is there a possibility some of the loan may be forgivable? So we know in some cases that's happening. Will this loan program be reviewed further to possibly lower the interest on the loan program?
Good question. I think, part of the, and again, I referenced the value of the credit unions. They've been great to deal with and very patient. Again, as we're doing this some of these knee-jerk policies, we're rolling things out and the word gets out, and we really haven't given the credit unions the opportunity to build the structure around it. So they've been, it's been a mammoth undertaking for them. But with respect to the program, it really did just hit the street the Friday before last, I think it was. So, in 6 days, they had about 750 applications. So the uptake's been enormous, which is a good thing. It's a sign that it's a coveted, valuable, and necessary program. There is so the grant is up to, the loan is up to $25,000. The grant is $1,500. So that's cash, no no strings attached. The business development voucher, so you get $1,500 in free access to a consultant of your choice around if it's website or export development, whatever it is, whatever kind of supports, that's there as well. So in terms of the grant versus loan structure, that's pretty much set in stone. And the question around the interest rate, to be frank with you, probably not. I think that again, this speaks to somewhat to the big bank situation. There's a level of required management and sort of keeping control of sort of the cash flow and the accounts at a certain level for the credit union. They still apply all their normal parameters and criteria to these loans as they would with other loans that are outside the government relationship. But quite frankly, a lot of these loans, a lot of those of the 750 that will access this are those who just truly wouldn't get a commercial loan. They wouldn't go to any of the banks and get this. So I don't want to sound crass or insensitive around that, but that's just the truth. I appreciate the fact that the loan's a bit higher in terms of the interest rate, but it's really the only option. And if it wasn't for this one, it would be tougher to get access to that loan, that capital, and the associated grant that goes with it. So I do appreciate that concern. And look, one of the people that reached out said I was going to take that loan and pay off my bank loan, thinking there would be a lower interest rate. I got to tell you, with all honesty, that's not what this is. We're not trying to build that kind of framework. That's not the point of this. The point of this for us was to hit, the massive amount of money that the Fed spent. We want to identify a gap, and the 20,000 and below with access to a grant and a voucher was something that we saw as necessary. And that's what this was for. It wasn't having an additional financial sort of tool to use to take advantage of an interest rate. Really, we just didn't put that lens on it. So, and quite frankly, we've got a $20 million investment in this particular piece. The credit union, between resources officially in terms of finances and also the amount of strain on their, workforce, this has been a big undertaking for both of us. So, quite frankly, I don't think you'll see anything change with that interest rate. And I think the structure of we're always open to conversations. And I think that as that 20 million gets exhausted, there's always going to be another chance to revisit. We're going to keep revisiting everything as we all have referenced earlier. So that's never off the table. So as this thing goes on, we'll look at any pivoting we have to do. We'll do it.
I'm going to call on Jamie Smith. She's the Director of Social Innovation at the Center for Employment Innovation. And Jamie, I just want to know, what you sort of observed in terms of how businesses are coping, at least during COVID, and what the future of work is going to be once we start looking at reopening.
Oh, thank you very much. I think if I knew what the future of work was going to be, I think I'd have an awful lot of privilege here with these distinguished guests, but unfortunately I can't tell you what I think it's going to be. I think what it can build on is the resilience of communities and businesses, and we certainly have heard those things coming up through the conversations today, whether it's in regards to the farmers markets and how they've been able to respond so quickly and provide food and supplies for local communities, if it's in terms of local businesses who've been able to supply PPE to our frontline healthcare workers and utilizing their 3D printers and their new technologies in ways that are serving those people who need it the most right now. Some of the themes that are coming up through the conversation today that I think can give us a lot of hope for what it is that we can do together is how we've been able to, how folks can work together and come together in these times of great challenge, and the amount of compassion and support that is there in local communities is quite amazing, wonderful. We've heard incredible stories here in Antigonish around the resilience of those folks, and also in partnership with the Coady Institute with those same people right around the world who've been able to look at this moment of great challenge and say, you know, there is something that we can do here together, that we can work in new and exciting ways to provide for our families, for our communities, and our neighbors. And so for me, that is really critical when we think about the future of work and workers. And it was just very nice to note that the government response first focused on individuals, those workers who would be most immediately impacted. Is how can we continue to create those environments at work in our communities that supports all people, so that they have equitable access to the labor market as we continue through COVID-19 and into what, as people commonly say, what the new normal is as we come onto the other side. And so these are some of the big questions that we're holding at the Coady Institute, at the Extension Department, with our partners. Certainly working with Nova Scotia Works over the last 3 years has been a wonderful opportunity, and especially in the last 2 months to see how quickly they've been able to shift to an online environment to ensure that local communities and businesses and those workers are getting support to what they need right now so that they can be thriving in their local communities. So those are just some things that are coming top of mind, and we're just very grateful to be able to be here with you today and to support this important conversation. And thank you to all the panelists for providing your insights.
Thank you very much, Jamie. I realized when we were speaking with the mayor and warden earlier, I'd asked a second part question, and I think I just wanted to get at Laurie's part a little bit more about what the town is doing. Laurie, could you speak to that a bit more in terms of the concrete actions piece?
Sure, thanks, John. I did talk a little bit about the piece where we are taking advantage of the provincial government's tax program. I think that's going to be a benefit for most of our commercial and a lot of our residents, taxpayers as well, that have a loss of income during this time. And I want to thank Jeff and his crew as well, because they worked very close with NSFM, the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, to get that deal hammered out. And so thank you very much, Jeff. We really appreciate it. I know you guys had to dig deep for that, and with everything going on, I know there's a lot of requests for funding right now and for help, and we really appreciate it. So if we look at it more local, the town understands the problems that the difficult times that everybody is having, the stress on families and businesses financially. From the beginning of the shutdown, we tried to be very understanding, and we remain committed to being very flexible with billing payments and stuff like that. We have waived the interest on the outstanding tax balances, water, electricity accounts until June. And we will, as that date approaches, we will revisit that as well and see if we do have to extend it a little bit further. And again, it's the province, working with the province and the federal government. And one of the other things that we did is be able to take some staff time with both Kate Gorman and Laura Bray and actually Steve Scannell as well, that really worked hand in hand with John on this today, and looking for ways that we can work together for the betterment of the entire community. Once we have a better idea of the province's plan and reopening, because it is not concrete yet, we'll start focusing on tourism with our communications. How can we talked about the importance of shopping local, but we have to stay local too. People will not be traveling as much, so it might be easier just to stay local, but we also want to have events for people that or things to do for people that while still maintaining or still have listening to the regulations and the recommendations coming down from the province. province. So as we move into the summer months, our communications and events will be working very hard to try to find something that local people can do around here and stay around here. And of course, we always have our Shop Local campaign at Christmas time, and what a great time to even stress it more now than while we're going through these difficult times. So that's our plan so far. And as the province and the federal government have said so far, this is drinking from the fire hose. We're learning as we go along, and what can we do to help make sure that we help people, and any suggestions, keeping in mind that we do work with under the umbrella of the MGA as well. But yeah, we'll do whatever we can to help to ease the burden on people.
Right. And regarding the MGA, Owen, you'd be in that same boat.
Yes, John, that's right. We're guided certainly by the MGA, but one of the things we're also being mindful of is all our community centers. We have a diverse community with lots of community centers, and they've been truly impacted, and their ability to remain somewhat whole is going to be a challenge. So we're keeping a close eye on what that's going to look like, and obviously working with our provincial and federal counterparts to see how we keep those facilities functioning. I mean, they have costs, lights and heat and all those things, and yet they can't have gatherings where they create the revenue. So no bingos, no dances, no weddings in a lot of cases. So we see that as another challenge within our community, and we're being very mindful. So we're going to watch as the tax season starts to unfold. We're going to watch to see where some of the challenges are. We are still looking at the provincial program that the mayor referenced, and we're going to evaluate that and the need for that as we move into the next phase of this, and certainly from the commercial side as well. So we're keeping a close eye, because there's certainly going to be a lot of impacts, and there's unintended consequences to some areas within our community that sometimes we don't even think about. So, but we're keeping our ear open to, comments from the public, and working with our partners, municipally, federally, provincially, to see if we can find a solid path forward.
Great, thank you, Owen. So we're going to open it back up to questions. We are going into some time here, but there are plenty of questions. I'll just put it back to the panelists. If you're okay staying around for a bit longer, maybe another 10 or 15 minutes, we'll see what we can do. If you have to leave, that's understood. You can make your exit, but we appreciate just maybe taking a few more questions. That's okay. And I'll put it back to you, Lindsay. You have a question?
There was, before I get to my question that I have noted down here, I think there was a Chris with his hand up. Chris, do you still have a question? No? Oh, okay. So my question, that this is also, I think this is a timely question, talking about reopening and things like that.
Lindsay,
the availability.
Sorry, Lindsay, Chris is back, so I'll just allow him to talk real fast.
Okay. Yep, go ahead, Chris.
Hi. Thank everyone for coming out and for this. Just quickly, I want to thank all levels of government for what they're doing. This is, as we all know, a major undertaking. We do run an essential service, and this has been something that has been on the news for frontline workers, especially in the healthcare. But in our line of business, we are an essential service, and we're very concerned with the availability of PPE for our workers and the clients that we serve. And what we're running into is the availability is very limited, and the cost is just outrageous. I imagine we all watch the news and we're seeing price gouging. If this is happening, or is this just the new reality of what it's going to cost to protect our workers and protect our clients? My question is, I guess, to the federal government, and I hate to put this on you, Sean, but I mean, it is one that the federal government is looking into and trying to provide for healthcare workers, but for frontline workers out of the healthcare system. How are we, is the government going to help us with the availability and the cost with PPE in order to serve our clients?
Thanks very much for the question, Chris. I don't know if Jeff will have something to add on top of this, or Mike, if you want to chime in. So generally speaking, we don't really get involved with questions about supplies or equipment in the healthcare sphere. This is not ordinary circumstances, obviously. You would have seen already the federal government launch significant funding initiatives to help domestic manufacturers either ramp up production if they had the existing capacity to do so, or pivot their operations from making one kind of product to another. The examples locally around hand sanitizer with Steiner's is a great example. We've got a manufacturer, an advanced manufacturer that usually makes pipeline and tank and submarine components that's now making face shields in Musquodoboit Harbor. We've got medical gowns at a textile facility being manufactured in Stellarton. And you've probably seen things like Stanfields or large auto manufacturers switch gears so they can manufacture ventilators now. The reality is what we've done is sort of put out a call and say, if you can produce PPE or essential medical equipment, we want to hear from you, and we want you to visit buyandsell.gc.ca so we can get money out as quickly as possible. We've foregone ordinary procurement practices, which usually do help bring the price down. The price, and that's because people need equipment now, and we're willing to pay a premium if we need to, because we know there's a cost to rebuilding a shop floor. I don't expect the price increase is going to be permanent. I think it's a factor of supply and demand, back to my earlier comment about the efficiency of markets. The whole world wants PPE right now. If I had the ability to travel in time, I probably would have bought stock for myself and my family in 3M, because they can't keep up with the global demand. And we're competing now with the entire world market, and there's only a very limited number of suppliers. So the short-term solution is one more on access to the equipment by funding directly producers who can actually build it and buying it and getting it to our provincial partners. In the longer term, I don't think the price pressure is going to be there. In fact, I expect it might go down, because we're going to have a wholesale review of our stockpiling and manufacturing of PPE that takes place on the back end of this. I think Jeff, from a provincial perspective, who's more close to the ground on health supplies, wants to jump in too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Chris. Basically, you know, this conversation, I think, quite frankly, Premier Ford in Ontario said it best, that they would never rely on anyone outside of Canada again for something of this nature. I think that's probably the sentiment for all of us. I think that when it comes to supply of this critical PPE, I think that, you know, obviously when we get these things under control, you know, if it's not in crisis mode with respect to COVID, I think we'll have the ability to look at that procurement, the sourcing, the manufacturing, and production, as Sean said. Stansfield were the first ones to come to me, John and Truro, to say that they could do this. And you're seeing, obviously, all kinds of producers, manufacturers step up to play a role and, quite frankly, expand their business model. So it's good on both ways. So I think with supply, there's no doubt about it. We'll have a very different mindset. I think many of us didn't think about masks and shields and gowns and such prior to this. I know I didn't. And now it's an essential sort of product to keep those who do the work that, you know, control viruses and disease and infections. So I think that's going to be sort of an academic part of the procurement for all governments. And again, provincially and territorially, it'll be the focus. I want to be very clear to everybody here before I say what I'm about to say. This isn't a leaking of policy. I'm not giving something away that I shouldn't be talking about. I'm just telling you, as Jeff MacLellan, the guy who's trying to be as logical as he can about this, if you take any business and the majority would be fit into this category that have been impacted financially by COVID. When there's that rebirth, whether it's the public order who have been revenue zero, or those who have been incredibly, extremely impacted but not technically closed, or the future sectors, the larger scale sectors across the board, manufacturing, et cetera, there's going to be a need. So if you've made zero revenue for the last 2 months and you've got to restock or stock for the first time things that you've never needed before, that's just an additional bill on top of the other things you already have. So from a human logical perspective, that's going to be part of the conversations that we have. Again, there's nothing sort of formulated around that, but it's just how can we help rebuild the economy post-COVID? It's going to be to transition businesses back to operation again. Other than your standard bills, the mortgages and the power rates and the wages and the inventory, the first one for me that jumps to mind is what's going to be the new requirement in this new reality, and PPE's number one. So I think that without question, Chris, that is on the table. It's part of it will be part of the conversation, and I think that when the time comes, government's going to have to take a serious look at that. It's just it's very common sense as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in for a second. As Mike Kelloway, MP, or Mike Kelloway, you look at your question, Chris, in terms of, it's a two-parter. Right now, we've invested about $2 billion in protective personal equipment. That's masks, as Jeff's talked about, face shields, gowns, ventilators, test kits, and hand sanitizer. And we talked about the buy and sell procurement, the flexibility around that Minister Anand for procurement, who's a Nova Scotian but an MP in Ontario, it's becoming obviously more flexible in terms of being able to service the needs on those key items around masks and face shields, gowns, ventilators, and having Canadian companies playing more of a role in the manufacturing of them. Then you look at the $230 million for surgical masks, rather, and the list goes on. But the fact of the matter is, to your point, this is, and we said this in the beginning of the call, this is not a sprint, and it's going to be a marathon. And the response here of government in the kind of scenario of if prices go up with respect to PPE and gowns and are cost prohibitive for businesses, and this is where I'll put the Mike Kelloway hat on. I don't see the government looking at that as acceptable. Prime Minister Trudeau has talked about the most important thing here is health, number one, and the economy, and they're both intertwined. So to take measures and to focus on those measures that would enable people to get the access to the PPE they need to not just start the economy, but to maintain their place in the economy and the new normal is something that I believe that we would look at. But there's no question, to Jeff's point, there's a whole new normal. It's here now, but it's also 12 and 18 and maybe 30 months, to one of your previous callers, down the road. We know that there is conservative measures are that we're 12 to 18 months away from a vaccine. But we also know that the world is changing and communicable diseases are changing, and that we're probably at some point going to be in similar positions within this generation of something similar. So we're going to need to adapt. We're going to need to be government of the day. Needs to be there to support the people that are supporting us.
Well, I thank you for your answers. I do have one more question. If you got somebody can, maybe all of you can sort of weigh in on this. And this has been the question that being asked across Canada. To open the economy, do we not have to open the daycares so workers that have children can get back to work? And that seems to be a major stumbling block. We're seeing in Quebec right now a trial and error, and we'll know in a couple of weeks if that was a correct decision or not. And you can all weigh in, or anyone wants to weigh in on it?
First of all, I'll weigh in with an easy one if that's a yes, but I'll tell you, and I mean this sincerely, I've heard Sean speak about this a number of times, so I'm not even going to try to articulate, because what he's about to say is exactly where I am and exactly where we should be. So, Sean, I think with that, you want to roll in?
Yeah, look, Chris, thanks for the question, and I will have to get moving not too long after we wrap this one up. There will not be a successful plan to reopen the Canadian economy if childcare is not a part of it. More than recognizing that it's an essential part of the economy, to move forward with a plan to reopen the economy without childcare in place, it is a decision to exclude women largely from participating in the economy. If I look at the future of our economy, pretending that we're going to get past this public health emergency in the near future, the participation of women in the labor force is one of the few areas where Canada's economy can actually enhance capacity. Before this crisis, our labor market was tight. We literally had tens of thousands of jobs in Atlantic Canada we couldn't find people for. And one of the only untapped markets of labor is women who are currently not working but interested in doing so. Simply put, without having childcare,
I can't talk right now. I'm in a meeting. Okay.
We got a few microphones.
Is everything
going.
okay?
And look, my experience over the past couple of weeks, like many of you on the phone, we get a young daughter at home. My wife and I are both trying to work. It's not as productive as it normally is, and the fact is we're not going to be able to operate our economy at capacity if childcare isn't central to the solution.
Okay, we have a question from Fred Alexander, and he is on the phone. So you go ahead, Fred.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'll try to make this quick, Sean. I know you have to get out of there. I've worked with several of you, and I thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to address a lot of the concerns and questions that we have. I really mean that. I know it's a lot. Real fast, like, I'm in the entertainment industry. I work in very many capacities of it. I mentioned or sent a message a little earlier that most of the people that work for One Stop Entertainment are subcontractors. They're local people, but we, pay them to our business account, et cetera. So unfortunately, we don't issue T4s, and so that disqualified us for the CDBA. We are trying to secure some impact, right? But what I was interested in, I think this is probably addressed to Sean, the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund. I don't know if there's a lot of information available yet on that, but I'm wondering if you do have any updates you can share with me, if that's something that companies like us, because there are hundreds of us just in the province alone that would fall into maybe that category where this kind of fund might help us out.
Thanks, Fred, and I'm happy to address the question. A full answer that's comprehensive is going to require you to have a conversation with ACOA on that particular fund. The details were just rolled out today. There's probably some fine tuning that the Regional Development Associations are going to do. They're working very closely with the CBDCs, so CBDC Noble in our area. They are expert in understanding the needs of businesses, particularly in small towns and rural communities in our area. I do think you could contact them. Reach out to Mark Van Weel, who if you don't, his number's available online, or just go to ACOA's website and find the contact detail from Nova Scotia. The reality is, people who pay their businesses, their workers as contractors, people who rent chairs in hair salons, people who pay out dividends rather than wages. We know there's a gap, and we're really trying to fix it. We're trying to do it in a way that doesn't open it up to abuse or make the program so expensive that it gets to a point where it's a bad use of public funds. We're really trying hard every day. This has been the problem for the past month of my life that has taken most of my time, in addition to some support for fish harvesters. The other problems, we've been able to roll solutions out after a matter of days. This one is nagging at us, and if you have better ideas on how to solve them, I would gladly take those conversations. The finance team. But this particular fund, offered through COA, it's meant to help businesses that do not otherwise qualify for emergency support, but still have cash flow concerns. So get on the phone with the COA. If you're having trouble getting anywhere with them, have a follow-up with our office, because we're still looking at other ways to solve this problem if this Regional Development Association solution doesn't reach everyone.
Okay, thanks a lot for the info, Sean. I will follow up. We've done a lot of research on websites and done a lot of phone calls over the last 2 months here. So I'll definitely choose that, go through that process. And if I do have any questions, I'll definitely follow up with your office. And thank you. And also thank you to Lori for taking a look at the property tax this fall.
Thank you, Fred. You'll note Lindsay Ross has put a link up, which you can find more information about that, about the programs related to federal government. With that, I think it's in everyone's interest to kind of wrap things up. I'm going to give you an email address. It is again contact@antigonishchamber.com. If you have questions that weren't answered today, please send them to me, and I'll see that they get to the appropriate individuals for an answer. So we won't leave anybody hanging. With that, I want to thank all of the presenters and panelists, MP Sean Fraser, MP Mike Kelloway, Minister Jeff MacLellan, Warden Owen McCarron, and Mayor Laurie Boucher, and of course, Jamie Smith from CEI. Thank you all very, very much. And thank you to everybody for participating and be engaging. And you've got me definitely excited about the business community in Antigonish and where we're going next after COVID. Lots of resilient businesses, so that's great. That's a great news story. Anyway, with that, thank you very much. We're going to log off now and enjoy the rest of your day.
See you, folks.
Thank you. See
Bye,
you, everyone.
thank you.
Yeah, everyone, take care.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.